In this section, we're going to examine more chords, and now we're going to actually examine their functions. So the first chord we're going to look at is called a diminished chord. We're going to get there by starting with a B major chord. B, D sharp, and F sharp. If you want to derive this chord on your own, just write out the B major scale and do what we've done before, taking every other note from B. Next, as we already know, to make B minor, we're going to lower that D sharp down to D. B, D, F sharp. Now, to make diminished, we're just going to take the F sharp, the fifth of that chord, and we're going to lower it to F natural. Notice that we have that tritone from the last video here. And we know that tritone resolves to C and E. So let's resolve this B diminished chord to a C major chord. Sounds great. That is the function of the tritone within that diminished chord. And this tritone is actually found in other chords. Let's take a look at dominant chords. On the screen, you'll see the C major scale. Please note that I'm actually starting this scale on the 5th scale degree, and you'll see the scale degrees labeled up top there. We are going to build our dominant chord in this key. So first off, a dominant chord is built off of the 5th scale degree. And we're actually going to take 4 notes instead of 3. So let's do every other note until we have 4 notes. As you can see, we have the B and F, our tritone again. And a very clear resolution. So the B wants to move a half step to C, and the F wants to move a half step to E. So let's take a listen to this chord. Also note the 7 over by the Roman numeral. Quite simply, if you look below the scale, if we pretend G is our quote-unquote new 1 just for a moment, we'll notice that we have a 7 up top there. Anytime you see a number in subscript to these Roman numerals, that indicates the intervals above the lowest note, or our bass note. Next, let's examine the major 7 chord. Notice we are now using the G major scale, and we're actually going to be using the 1 as our root note here. So just like the dominant 7th chord that we just built, we're going to every other note from the bass, which is our G, until we have 4 notes. This chord does not have a tritone in it, and it has a much different sound than the dominant 7th chord. You would notate this one 1 major 7 because our root is G, the 1, the root of the chord. Notice that we have a major 7th in this chord from the G to the F sharp, whereas the other chord, where we had an F natural, we had a minor 7th, knowing that taking a major interval, G to F sharp, and lowering it a half step makes it minor. Next, let's examine what is called the sus4 chord. The sus4 chord is quite simple. It's another 3-note chord, just like our original triad, except you trade that 3 for, guess what, the 4. Thus, sus4. Take a listen. Sus2 chords work basically the same way. Take that 3 and switch it out for a 2. Take a listen. Next, let's examine augmented chords. Augmented chords act kind of like diminished chords, except instead of lowering the 3rd and then the 5th, we're actually just going to raise the 5th. So using the G major chord, we're going to take that D and raise it up a half step to D sharp. And that gives us an augmented chord. Next, let's examine chords with notes added on past the octave. So, remember at the beginning of the course I mentioned that sometimes when you come back up to the 1 an octave later, you call it an 8. And you actually call it an 8 so that the numbers past it can be called numbers greater than 8. So 2 is now 9, 3 is now 10, and so forth. Let's take a look at a 1-9 chord in G major. Quite simply, we're just going to add an A in. But this A is going to be an octave above that bass note. Take a listen. Now, let's say we call it a flat 9 chord. Well, that would just mean we take that 9 and we flat it. Take a listen. This logic can be used to make 1-13 chords, flat 13 chords, and so forth. Any number above 8 can be added. However, you will not often see a 10 chord because 10 is the same as 3 and 3 already belongs to the chord, so you won't actually specify an extra note unless it does not belong to the original chord regardless of its octave. Let's examine diminished chords with sevenths added onto them. First, we're going to start off with G minor. You'll see the scale on the screen, and also the G minor chord is circled. We're going to add the 7th of this scale onto the chord. So now we have a minor 7 chord. Simple. Next, to make that minor chord diminished, we're going to take the 5th and we're going to lower it a half step, giving us G, B flat, and D flat. This is a diminished 7th chord, but it's only half diminished. To make it fully diminished, we're going to have to take that 7th and lower it still to an F flat. Now you might think that's strange because E and F, there's only a half step, and really there's no such thing as an F flat. But in this case, theoretically we have an F flat because E would be 6 over G, and we could not call it a 7. So what we have is our 3rd, the diminished 5th, as well as the diminished 7th. A diminished 7th being a half a step smaller than the minor 7th.